In this video, you'll learn how to block websites during work hours in Python. We're going to write a script to alter our host file, which performs name resolution before a DNS lookup is performed. I'm going to create a file. We'll call it block.py. And what I'm going to do is import a few things. We're going to need to import sh utility. This is going to allow us to handle file operations. I'm going to import time. I'm going to import date time as well. Okay. Next, I'm going to define my working hours, and this is going to be a window of time where we will either block or unblock websites based on our window of time that we define. So I'm going to define time in range. I'm going to create a start time, a end time, and a current time. And this is going to be read from left to right, and we're going to say return start, and this is where start is less than or equal to the current time, right? And where the current time is less than or equal to the end time, right? Because that makes sense. Obviously, if the current time is greater than the end time, this script wouldn't make any sense, okay? And it wouldn't work the way you would expect it. Okay, so our start variable is going to be datetime dot time, and we're going to set it to, just for our test purposes, we're going to set it to midnight, okay? And the way you read this is obviously hour, minute, and then second. You can do millisecond as well, but that's kind of ridiculous. This will suffice. End will be our date time, dot time, and I guess we'll just say, I don't know, 5 a.m., something like that. Okay. Let's create our current time. Our current time is going to be datetime dot datetime dot, no, not dot time, dot now. And we're not going to pass anything through there, but we are going to ask for time, right, at the end. And if we just had datetime now, it would give us this really long string of integers. But what I want is something a bit simpler, right? Something smaller. So we're going to grab time at the end of that. Okay? And I'm going to show you how this works. Can I select on the iPad? Yeah. I'm going to show you how this works just a little bit later, okay? In a Python interpreter. So we need to edit our host file. So I'm going to create a variable called hosts. I'm going to set hosts equal to, right, our etc hosts. You have to be very careful when you do this because we're going to be asking for write permissions on top of hosts. So you should back up your host file before you start playing around with this script, because you can accidentally actually erase all the data in your host file. Not that that's all super important. I mean, it's really easy for you to get it back, but just go ahead and copy that out before you start playing with the script. That's my advice. We're going to add a redirect, and I'll tell you about that in a second. We're going to say 127, 001. You can also do 0000, because that'll also forward the user to localhost. And so just so you know what we're doing, basically every single time someone goes to one of our blocked websites, we're going to be forwarding them to localhost, which obviously there's nothing there, right? So it's kind of like a redirect into a pie hole. Okay, we're going to say websites. This is going to be an array of websites where website would be the singular and websites would be the plural. Okay, and we're going to use that a little bit later. Let's say Facebook, so all the time syncing websites. Okay, and we're going to say Twitter, but I'm going to do something a bit different. I'm going to show you one of the kind of pitfalls with this script. So www.twitter.com. Notice I didn't add the www prefix, so the subdomain on Facebook. I only added it on Twitter, and oops. You're going to see where this actually makes sense. And what you have to understand with websites is you have a few parts of a website, right? So you've got your HTTP or HTTPS protocol. So that's your protocol section. And then you've got your subdomain. So maybe it's like www, right? So that's your subdomain. I might as well just put this in the same line. Or it might be web or translate, like with Google, translate.google.com. So the translate part here, this is our subdomain. Right? And I call this the principal domain, but most people just call it domain, right? So your domain. And this is going to be your TDL, so your top level domain, .com or .eu or .de, right? So we have to understand how this works and how the websites are going to be broken up because, for example, if we go to just twitter.com, well, this won't block access, the script won't block access to twitter.com, but it will block access to www.twitter.com, right? So you're going to need to specify your subdomains as well as your domain and your TDL, okay? That's very important. So before I get into, I'll just do it right here, while true. Okay, so this is what we're going to need to do next. We're going to set up a loop where, while our case is true, we're going to write these websites here, to our host file, meaning that they won't actually, we won't have access to these websites. And if it's not true, then we'll go ahead and just remove these websites, right? But before I do that, so I'm going to get into a Python interpreter and show you how datetime works. It's pretty cool. So we're going to import datetime. Probably need to spell that correctly. There we go. I'm also going to import time. All right, I'm going to say D is equal to datetime. .datetime. .now. I'm not going to pass anything through here. And I'm going to ask for D. So we see that we're in 2021 on the 7th month of the 10th day of the 8th hour of the 52nd minute. You have your seconds and your milliseconds. Pretty cool. This is a bit too detailed for us, so what I'm going to do is, let's see if I can do this, grab .time. Yeah, this is simpler. And so what we're doing here with the .time method at the end is we're grabbing something a bit simpler. So we don't actually need the year and the day and the month. We just need the hour, right, and the minute, because those are the things we're going to be playing with. It doesn't really matter for us what day it is, right, because this script is going to be running all throughout the week. Okay, so let's go ahead and get out of here. All right, back into the script, now that we understand how datetime works. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if end is greater than current, right? So basically, if the end time up here, if it's greater, so if it's larger, a larger number than the current time, right, we're going to print out get to work, right? And now we're going to handle the file. So with open, we're going to call hosts, and host is what we define up here, right? So it's this file in this directory. We need to read and do a little bit more on this, read plus. So we're going to use this as a variable called file. It's very common. We're going to say content equals file.read. Oops. Okay, so content is going to be our variable we're going to play with in just a second. And we're going to say for website, so singular, in websites, right? So this is for singular inside of the array websites. So we're going to say if website in content, so if the website exists. Not that this matters because we're going to write a statement later that will remove all the duplicates as well, but just so you don't have multiple records of the same thing. So if it does exist, we're going to use the placeholder pass. So don't do anything, right? So if the website Facebook is already inside of my host file, right? So don't add it again, essentially. All right, we're going to say else. I'm going to say file.write, and we're going to write those to our host file, okay? But what we need to do here is kind of respect the way the host file in Linux, or I think even in the Mac this is the same, how it functions, right? So it has to have a space. So we always preface our redirect, so the IP address that we're redirecting it to, and then we're going to specify the actual website itself, right? And so this is something that gets taken into account before a DNS lookup is performed. And so the way this works in Linux, it also works the same in Mac, is that your host file will always come first, right? It's the first thing your machine looks at before going to the outside world to make some sort of lookup. So what we're going to need to do here is we're going to need to say redirect, right? So we're basically pulling in this IP address, this local IP address. We're going to say redirect plus, so we're going to concatenate on that space. So this works with a space in your host file or a tab, but a space is going to be fine. We're going to concatenate website. So we're going to do website, and this is singular. It's very important. we're going to then add a name break. We're going to add a line break. And if we don't add a line break, this won't work because the host file can't have, this one long line of entries. It has to have entries by line break, and this is how all configuration files work. So you have a line break, another configuration entry, another one. It reads from top to bottom. It's very, very logical. So we're going to say else. So if this first part doesn't pass, we're going to say else with open, and now we're going to need to open up the same file, so the host file. But I'm going to show you a different way to do it. We can actually just grab the location of the host file, just like this. Probably need to put an S on that. Okay, and we're going to call this an old hosts file, right? So we're going to say old hosts. We're going to open up a new file at the same time in this same statement, and I'm going to show you why in a second. We're going to put it to home. Doesn't really matter where we put it for the moment. Well, it does matter, but for the sake of this video, it doesn't really matter. We're going to use write, so r plus or write. I'm going to say as new hosts. We're going to call this a new host file. Okay, as a little instance variable that we're going to play with in just a second. Okay, so we're going to open up a for loop for line. So for every line, right, in old hosts. So for every single entry, so every one of these entries within this file, old host, which is the host file here in our directory, we're going to say if not any. Right, so if not any website, okay, singular website in line, so in each line, for website, still on singular, in websites. So this is going to be inside of our array websites. Okay, I hope that's not too confusing. We're going to basically say new hosts, right? So we're going to go in and just kind of wipe out the line while we're creating our new hosts file. I'll show you how this works in just a second. So hosts.write, write line. Probably need to spell that correctly. Okay, so what's happening here is we're basically going, okay, open up this file, this host file, as this variable that we're going to play with here. And I also want to open up a new file that we're going to play with as we call new hosts. Okay, it's kind of off the screen, but it's over here. New hosts, right? And we ask Python to say, okay, Python, for every line, so for every line as it represents, a line break, item, right? Every line in old hosts. So we say, if not any, website, in line for websites. What we're doing is we're targeting all of the websites in our list up here in our array, right? We're targeting all of them in websites, so in our array. Then we say just basically, it's removing them essentially, but what it's really doing is it's just creating another file here, hosts, in the home directory without, right? So without these entries. So it's just excluding them when it writes the new file. So now we need to move that file to our etc directory, and because this is going to be running as a privileged user, it's going to automatically overwrite hosts with the, in my case, the appropriate UMask. And so the admin user, the root user, the super user, is creating the host file, okay? And that permission set on that host file is going to be exactly the same, in my case at least, as this one. It just depends on what your UMask is set to, and probably some other things in your machine. So we're going to use that sh utility from before. We're going to move our home hosts, right? Oops. And we're going to move it to our new directory. Probably need to do this correctly. We'll go etc. Okay, and when we're done here, I'm going to give myself a printout of free time. And let's go ahead and sleep. Take a break. And this is going to put the script to sleep for 5 seconds, and it's going to recheck the current time every 5 seconds. So our current time right here. So let's give this a shot. See if I made any mistakes. So first I'm going to cat the host file just so you see. Right. I don't have any of those entries like Facebook and Twitter. Now I'm going to run my script. Okay, it's free time. I'm outside of my window. And you see it's going to run every 5 seconds. Okay, I'm going to close out of this. Now, if I cat my host file, you're not going to see any changes, right? But let's just go ahead and flip. Let's flip this condition here. Let's flip the statement. Right? Let's say that end actually needs to be less than current time. Right? So our end time here, 5 a.m., needs to be less than the current time. And the current time is 9 a.m. Right? Let's close out of this. Run the same script. So we're going to say Python blocker. Okay? It says, hey, get to work. So now if we cat our etc hosts, we're going to see, oh, Facebook, Twitter, we can't go to those websites because it's just going to be redirecting us to localhost. Pretty cool. So how can we run this script in a practical way? Well, what you could do is you could say nohup Python, and you can run your blocker and put an and at the end of this. This is going to run this in the background without needing this shell open, right? So I'm going to go ahead and close this. Now if I tail that file, you're not going to see anything. I don't have any errors, right? But normally your nohup will actually put your errors in your terminal output in this file normally. Okay, so how do we know it's actually running? Well, we could say psaux. I'm going to grep out, what do we call it? Block Python. Okay, we see that we're running that script here as root right there. Have our PID right there. So let's go ahead and kill it. We can say pkill. I don't know if this will work if I actually do block.py. I don't think that's going to work. Yeah, so that doesn't work. So you might want to do kill 9 PID. Probably need to spell that correctly. PID 10487. Okay, it says there's nothing that matches. If we do our psaux, great. Yeah, and it says that we killed that process. So nohup is a great solution for you to run the script in the background. So from this terminal instance, I can't actually show you that this works. So I'll be back in just a second. All right, so in our host file, we specify www.facebook.com, but we don't specify facebook.com, right? So facebook.com won't work. The same is true for Twitter, right? So in our host file, we specify twitter.com, but we don't specify twitter.com with the www prefix. So if we try that, it won't work. So I know my script is working, and I know that specifying my subdomain is important. So be careful when you're writing your script. You need to specify your subdomains as well as your domain. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for more.